Hello, everyone. Ikaiden here. Today we are doing a synopsis of episode 2 for The Lion Song. If you haven't seen our playthrough for episode 1, please check that out. That said, let's get in. Alright. So we open on a train scene where we have a couple and they're saying they're quote obligatory goodbyes. But from the verbiage, it sounds admittedly sarcastic, but goodbyes nonetheless. What we see in just a little bit, the young man right there was in the early part of episode 1, where we find out that that young man is the younger brother of Wilma. Otis, I think, is his name. And so he's the one that's saying goodbye to his parents in the early part, and now the gentleman that was saying goodbye to his lady friend. All right, so we open on this scene where I think is like the patron or something to that effect of this society, who is introducing the two Markerts, the elder, who is Joseph Markert, and the younger, who is Franz Markert. Franz basically asked his grandfather, Joseph, to introduce him to the society in the hopes to find his next model. So Franz is our main character for this episode, and Joseph is a mountain climber. So we've got the younger is the painter, and the elder is the mountain climber. At this point in the story, Franz is a moderately known painter, and some would call him an amateur. He meets, at some point in the story, he meets an art critic. And you'll notice, if you've watched our playthrough, that our critic, avoids him throughout the interactions. And after some following around, you actually get to speak with her. And the critic finally gives him feedback where his art pieces are very amateurish, and his art pieces are where the expressionism is expressionless. At this point, you're going to choose which model you want. You have a choice from the banker or the soldier. From there, you would invite whichever model you want to choose from back to the workshop. And then from there, we're going to pick up the story from the workshop. See you there. All right, so here's the scene where your model... This is the scene where I chose the banker. You have the option, like I said, to choose a different one. But this is the scene where you choose your model. Depending on what questions you ask and the feedback circle that you get starts a series of feedback loops will help them reveal what layers they give you. Depending on that feedback loop, and then at some point later in the conversation, right there, you see the first layer appears. And then somewhere later down that in the painting process, you might have to reaffirm that layer to solidify it at some point. If done incorrectly, that layer might not come to fruition, and the painting might you see how it reappears again. And if that feedback loop isn't reaffirmed correctly, it might turn into another one, or you might get something else. And what ends up happening is you get this motley of different layers. And so in the painter's mind, I think that's the perception that we're trying to get, is if you're trying to paint you ask too many questions, or too many different questions. And so in the painter's mind, you get this confusing image. And so when you're trying to paint, you don't get a clear image of what the subject you're trying to paint. What we need is 3 layers for each of the subjects. And if it's not 3 layers, then the painting becomes incomplete. And when the painting is complete, whether you get 3 layers or not, it gets sent back to the salon for critique. So here is where this painting by the banker is critiqued. in short, what basically needs to happen is you need to experience the quote real world. And after a long exchange and questions, this interaction leads him, Franz, back to his grandfather. So here we meet Franz's grandfather, Joseph, in the market to meet, well, quote, real people in real life. And so Joseph gives Franz his example of what real life is, and he gave him an example of a mountain climbing example. And so here he gives him an example of his experience, which is 40 meters on a vertical face of a mountain, which is a extreme example, but nonetheless a great example. And so what Joseph ends up doing is directs Franz to a actress right there in who we'll see in the umbrella. She introduces herself as an actress, and you are given the option to paint her. And so you go through that interaction, and then you are given the option to go to a cafe, and we'll pick it up from there. All right, here we are in the cafe, and Franz is interested in speaking to these two gentlemen, particularly the one in the top hat right there. And they are speaking well above about a different subject, and so he's interrupting their conversation. And there he goes. He sees one individual in the top hat that automatically he sees he's got two layers. Specifically, he's speaking about a duality of the individual. And he's conflicted, well, not necessarily conflicted, but interested in that duality. And so he's almost urged to paint that individual because of that duality. And it's not necessarily that it's a conflict of that duality. That's why he wants to paint them. And so in my playthrough, my original playthrough, I went through and selected this individual again. So you're given the option to choose whom you want to paint. So you're given to choose either the actress or the painter. Just like in the first day, you're given to choose the banker or the soldier, one of the two. So you can choose whomever you want to. So if you choose the mathematician, you just be advised, the mathematician, the question, the feedback loop that I had spoken about earlier, that feedback loop ends in a very different way. So you have to go through that affirmation cycle in a different way. So it's revealed at the end of each session with his models that Franz loses hours of time. He blacks out, and those hours of time he cannot account for. And so he is very concerned because it's happening after each session. And so what ends up happening is after he kind of, expresses his concerns, he then goes through this period of where you as the player can explore his apartment and go through and click things and choose what you want to do in his apartment. So in this scene, the painting is brought back to the salon for critique. But before that critique is given, the critic expresses concern about his well-being, and she refers him to a psychologist. All right, here we are with the psychologist, and Franz is basically speaking to him about what has been happening. And he explains that he has had blackouts after each session. The psychologist asks how and why he's got his blackouts and what he does. Well, the psychologist reveals that he's psychoanalyzing his subjects. And then the psychologist asks Franz if he can ever see his layers. And Franz basically says that he's never been able to see his own layers. the psychologist, asks why, or something to that effect. And then after some time, we'll start to see that, Franz can actually, for the first time after some sessions, Franz will actually see his layer, his first layer, and then it kind of trips him out. He's like, "What was that?" And he's surprised to see his own layer. Not too long afterwards, he was able to identify a second layer. And so the psychologist says, "Yeah, I spoke with your grandfather and the critic, and they said that there is a second easel in your workshop. And if you've been playing through the episode with us, you'll know there isn't a second easel in the workshop." And I had mentioned up to this point that you have to pay attention to what's going on in this game. And I love this kind of stuff when it makes you have this intellectual intrigue. I love these kind of things because you're like, what the heck is going on? And so the psychologist goes, "Okay, so if you have no second easel, then I won't suggest that you go back to your workshop and pull off the sheet in your workshop." And so this is the scene where you see me going, walking. You'll see a little person walking back to the workshop, and he says, "I won't suggest you go back to your workshop, and I won't suggest you pull that sheet off of that easel." And it's like, what the heck is he talking about? There is no second easel. And right here, you'll see it. I'm like, yeah, right. There is no second easel. There's never been a second easel here. And so you're like, okay, fine. I'm not losing it as a player. And then, oh my gosh, there is a second easel right there. And you're like, what the heck? This is the kind of stuff that I love in movies, when you watch in movies and stuff like that. And so now you're like, okay, gotta reveal it. And you're like, oh my gosh, there's a painting underneath it. And so after going back, after a few moments, that second easel is revealed that there is a painting underneath. And this entire time, Franz has been trying to paint the layers of himself. And so what you go through now is, because all of your subjects, you have been trying to paint 3 layers. This entire time, you have been trying to paint 4 layers. And I joke around and I go, why did he undress? Is it just me? What has been going on? Why is he... I don't understand, but that's neither here nor there. But it's funny. So you go through this process of identifying the people that you are your subjects. And you go through this, if done correctly, like everyone in your painting so far, you go through this period of identifying statements that were made by your subjects and connecting them to yourself as the painter. And if done correctly, you'll see, like that right there, it will uncover layers of yourself. If done incorrectly, what will end up happening is layers will not be revealed. And like other paintings, whether done correctly or not, it will leave layers uncovered. And so you just go through this process and you see it there. And after these statements are made, you have to reaffirm that these statements are correct for the painting to be revealed all the way in it. And it is for me, this episode was very difficult, because not only do you have to pay attention, you have to retain information of every single painter, and you have to make sure that, like, did I hear that right? Because for me, I kind of compartmentalize every single instance. So each model was their own kind of entity, right? And so once one model was done, I'm like, all right, I'm done. Move on to the next one. All right, I'm done. Move on to the next one. And to have to recall the last one, I'm like, oh, geez. Okay, what was said? And then you have to ensure like what was really said. So what ends up happening in between the session here is that Franz brings, like the other sessions, is Franz brings his painting back to the salon for critique. But since so many weeks has passed, the critics stopped showing up to the salon. And so he then asked for feedback from the patron. And the patron's like, don't show this piece because the people want to see the masterpieces, but not the journey. And what this piece shows is the journey to mastery, not the destination. And so he goes, where is the critic? And the patron's like, I don't know. He's like, she hasn't been here for weeks. And with you not here, the mystery and the mastery is kind of gone. And so he's like, maybe I can bring her back. He's like, okay, here is her address. Maybe you can talk her into it. And so this brings us back to her apartment. Depending on the choices that you've made along the way, you may have the opportunity to earn her affections, the critic's affections. Same thing like the other portions in the game. You have the option to either paint her or your grandfather. All right, everyone, that wraps up episode 2. Thank you for joining us. I look forward to seeing you in episode 3, Derivation. See you later.